What's up everybody, Couch Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Halo Infinite video, and in this video we're going to be breaking down a Halo rotations guide, because a lot of you are rotating poorly and dying for freaking free. So we're going to break down how spawning works, how to rotate safely, and all the tips and tricks incorporated. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Now first off, let's talk about how spawning works in Halo. Now in a general mode like Slayer, you are going to be spawning away from wherever the grouping of the enemy team is. So if the enemy team is in a group of 4, your team is going to spawn on the opposite side as far away as possible. However, if the enemy team is split up, things can get kind of tricky where you could spawn in a place where there's a straggler nearby. Not the bulk of the enemy team, but it still is very important that you're aware of your surroundings. If you spawn somewhere isolated, you could be right next to an enemy. Now on top of that, if you are far away from your team, so if you have 3 teammates that are grouped up and you're far away from them, the enemy team could spawn right near you or even on top of you. That's why it's very important for you to make sure that if you're alone, that you are really carefully checking the area, checking the corners, realize that an entire enemy team could spawn right next to you at a moment's notice. And that's incredibly important because if enemies are there, oftentimes the best things that you could do is tuck in, try not to be seen, allow the enemy to route past you, and then potentially engage behind them or get away, because if you try to take a fight there, you're just gonna die for free. Now, this is how it works in a mode like Slayer. However, when you talk about capture the flag or domination, enemies are more likely to spawn on objectives. So in capture the flag, an enemy is more than likely going to spawn towards their flag. That being said, the spawner typically doesn't spawn people within line of sight of the enemy, or at least it tries to. It doesn't always succeed, if I'm being honest, but if you're right on top of where the flag is, sometimes the enemy will actually spawn slightly away, but still nearby, so keep that in mind. Now before we move on, if you like the in-depth tips and you want even higher quality content, the GameLeap website right now has tons of high quality guides tailored to you, breaking down pro matches, high level streamers, and much more. So do yourself a favor and go check it out right now down below. Now the next thing that people are going to ask is, how do I rotate safely? And the most important thing that you need to do if you want to rotate safely every single time is track enemies, track their location, and track the number of enemies alive. If you just killed the entire enemy team, realize that in approximately 8 seconds, the enemies will respawn again, and you have a moment to kind of relocate, but also keep in mind how spawning works, so an enemy could spawn near you if you're too far away from your team. On top of that, tracking enemies' locations is a great thing because even if the enemies aren't all dead, if you know where the enemies are, you see 2 over near Seaside, you see 1 near mid, then you can make sure that if you are flanking on the right side, you're only going to run in at max to 1 potential enemy. So that gives you a lot better indication about how to rotate safely. And if you're rotating with 2 people on the right side and you have the other areas accounted for or the other enemies accounted for, if you run into that one of person, you're going to be able to kill them very easily with an advantaged fight. Now the next question that often comes up is, when should you rotate solo, or should you ever rotate solo? Well, this is actually one of the biggest mistakes that players are making when they try to rotate solo and they run face first into 3 enemies and then die for free, right? I'm sure that that's happened to you, and you see it happen to your trash teammates over and over and over again. So it kind of begs the question, should you ever rotate solo? Well, yes. However, it's very important to know where enemies are, knowing their general location. If the enemies are taking control of a site on Stronghold, or if they have a flag, you know where one of them are. You look around, you gather that information, knowing where the enemies are, or at least the bulk of the enemy force. If you're ever rotating solo, you got to keep in mind that there's always a chance that you could run into a straggler that is also trying to make a play for a power weapon or an item or whatever. But the goal here is to make sure that you don't run into multiple enemies. If there's a solo or someone doing something similar to you and you run into them, at least you get a fair 50-50. But if you have no information about where anyone is, your number one thing that you should always be doing is trying to regroup with your team. Then you can actually predict their spawns a lot more consistently because your team is together when the enemy respawn. You're not gonna run into a random giant squad of the enemies and die for free. And then after the fact, once you gather that information, then you could potentially make a solo flank or a solo rotate. Now the next question that often comes up is, okay, so I'm making a solo play or I'm flanking with my team or whatever, what can I do to actually get some free kills on the enemy? What can I do to mess up their rotation? And the best thing that you could actually do is put yourself in the mind of the enemy. Why would they go to X? And you got to think about where are the desirable locations on the map and what are the desirable items and weapons. Basically, if you play on a map like Streets, you know that more than likely enemies are going to want to contest Spanker and things like that, but it actually even goes a step further to even some of the weapons on the map. Think about the Bulldog, right? If you grabbed the Bulldog earlier, used it for a while, but you know that after you died, it's most likely to respawn, you can go set yourself up in a situation where you cut off an enemy trying to go secure it. You take into account the fact that an enemy would really want to acquire that weaponry, so you put yourself into their shoes and you put yourself in a position to easily cut them off. And it's even better if you put yourself in a position where if they send multiple enemies there, you can always back up or rotate away. This gives you a lot of flexibility while at the same time potentially punishing an enemy that is trying to go rotate solo or route solo to secure that weapon before going back to their team, only for you to basically set a trap waiting for them, get first shot on them and kill them, and then you get to steal the Bulldog for yourself. Now, just keep in mind that this can be applied to any powerful items, any objectives like the Oddball, like Capture the Flag, like Stronghold. It pretty much applies to anything. It's just putting your mind in the shoes of the enemy. Now, the last thing that I gotta mention when talking about rotations is keep in mind that a rotation or the positions you're taking as you route across the map could be stronger or weaker depending on the type of secondary you have. If you have a really powerful close range weapon, let's say a sword or a mangler, routing in a way where if enemies actually attack you or fight you, you have cover to run behind, and if enemies want to chase you, they play right into that strength. So let's say you're going for a really risky play, you see an opportunity to go try to contest something. Let's say it's the Oddball, or maybe it's freaking Invis, but when you go try to contest it and you start to run away, two enemies chase you. Being able to position yourself or route in a way where enemies have to chase you, where you're almost guaranteed to get one with the mangler, makes it so that that play is less of a risk. And it's something that you should definitely be thinking about, risk versus reward, and also how does your secondary play into the strength of where you're routing, and how does it justify the areas that you're taking? Because if your secondary is like a mangler, you don't want to be running straight through the open, right? It puts you at a fundamental disadvantage, and you're not going to be able to use the weapon strength to either disincentivize a push onto you or even get some value as well. So definitely keep all this in mind. And if you want more in-depth breakdowns of pros rotating and more targeted tips and tricks, definitely go to the GameLeap website where we have high-quality advanced guides, tons of courses, and pro breakdowns with more videos added daily. Go check it out right now down below. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, let me know down below. Thank you so much for coming by. Follow me at Coach Mills OW on Twitter. I love your faces, and I'll see you next time.